Hey guys, it's Gina. Welcome to the place where your growth meets mine. Let's talk. So there is a quiet pressure in the world to explain ourselves, to summarize who we are, to produce something recognizable, which might seem net and repeatable, and it often arrived discussed as advice, as an opportunity, as encouragement. But in reality, it is a subtle force that pushes the mind to stop moving, stretching, to stop becoming, because once the mind is recognizable, once it is packaged, labeled, measured perfectly, it becomes easier to consume and easier to evaluate, to reward. And yet, every moment we allow ourselves to be measured, we shrink little by little, we conform little by little, and we stop following the natural curiosity that led us to think in the first place. And the irony about that is that the very qualities that makes us interesting and unique and alive are the one most at risk of being silenced because they cannot be branded, they cannot be marketed, and they cannot fit neatly in a product or a persona. And the mind, when it's living, is not meant to fit neatly anywhere, to explore, to question, to wonder, to collide with contradiction, to allow it to feel uncomfortable, to notice without demanding resolutions. And in that discomfort, in that space of not knowing, the mind grows in ways that recognition awards, and it applauses it. I have watched people around me, people who have decided that every thought must be shareable, that every insight must be packaged, that every moment must be visible. And they move through the world with a certain precision, and what is missing is the rawness of the thought, of the unpredictability, of that imperfection that creates the ability to allow the mind to wander without being evaluated, to make mistakes, without the fear of being watched, to experiment without any expectation in return. And when I see this, I feel both admiration and sorrow. Admiration because it is a skill that it takes to maintain such control, and sorrow for the life of a mind that is quietly constrained beneath it. Because no amount of recognition can replace the living process of thinking, which is messy, is slow, contradictory, whatever you want to call it, deeply personal. It is precisely this messiness, slow, contradictory, deeply personal work that cannot be monetized, not quantified, cannot be celebrated publicly. Yet, it is the work that matters the most, according to my opinion. So, there is a temptation to brand the mind, to make it recognizable, and to fix it into something that can be consumable, something repeatable. Because the world rewards consistency, and it does it so loudly, so relentlessly, that it comes with the danger of succumbing to this temptation that we do begin to value attention over discovery, validation over growth, and soon there comes a moment when we no longer recognize the mind that we are trying to preserve, because it has been reshaped by the eyes of the other people around us. And this is the invisible danger, that quiet erosion of the thought that happens not through trauma, not through failure, but through recognition itself, through being rewarded for sameness. The safest path is the path that stays familiar, where you feel safe and observable. It's human nature. And yet, we resist this temptation when we allow our thoughts to remain messy, unmarketable, unrecognizable, and we feel vulnerable. We feel vulnerable and uncomfortable as well, because the human mind is prone to seek approval, constant safety, constant understanding. And yet, this very act of allowing the thought to be free requires that we accept discomfort, uncertainty, and even isolation, because we are no longer producing something that is easy to grasp, easy to like, easy to share, easy to consume. And this is precisely where true intellectual growth begins, in the tension between that mind's desire for freedom and the world's desire for recognition, in that friction that forces the thought to move, to strain, to evolve, to stretch beyond its comfort zone. And it is here, in this tension, that we truly are able to cultivate a mind which is merely known. I think often how recognition shapes us, how it praises the course of a thought, how a single compliment or a single acknowledgement can steer the mind in directions that feel safe rather than true. And the mind is delicate in this way. It's easily persuaded, conditioned, not by force, but by subtle reward, by the soft echo of approval, by that quiet pull of attention. And the challenge becomes noticing this, feeling it, acknowledging it, and yet choosing not to follow it, choosing to allow the thought to evolve without immediate validation, without pressure to be visible, without obligation to be repeatable. And in this quiet, let's say, rebellion, in this commitment to internal growth, the mind begins to find its ways, its own integrity, its own life, and starts to feel respected. After all, there is an old thought that I carry with me. It's kind of a personal proverb. When thought is rewarded, it tries to survive. When thought is allowed to die, wisdom appears. And I repeat this to myself often because I tend to neglect it. I tend to think it as a rule, as a reminder, because the moment that we clinch to the survival of our own ideas, we stop thinking, we stop questioning, we stop evolving, and when we allow ideas to emerge and vanish freely, when we allow them to be imperfect, contradictory, incomplete, whatever they want to be, we discover that the mind is capable of far more than we had imagined, far more than just an applause or recognition, far more than branding or attention. So I also noticed that in subtle ways which identity becomes attached to the thought, how we begin to see our mind as a product, as a brand, as a persona to be marketed, and that moment that this happens, the work itself becomes secondary to presentation, secondary to expectation, secondary to the performance. And yet, that moment that we notice, the pull, we can begin to untangle it. And in that untangling, we can find the freedom to think, the freedom to wonder, to question, to be wrong. Yeah, being wrong is a sweet type of freedom. I reflect on the strange beauty of this practice, how it mirrors life itself, how pressure to perform, to be known, to be packaged, whatever you want to call it, to be visible, constant, etc. How we are tempted daily to sacrifice the living movement of thought for ease, for reward. And yet, if we persist, if we allow the mind to develop without reducing it to a brand, we find not only intellectual growth, but we find integrity, presence, and a kind of a quiet power that cannot be measured or replicated or stolen from anyone. That becomes our own product, created from being reasonable and using wisdom. That quiet power cannot be stolen. It's a power that we discover that the mind is not the product, not the persona, it's not the performance, but it's a living companion, an evolving, questioning, growing, alive companion, entirely of our own. Hey guys, it's Gina. Welcome to the place where your growth meets mine. I'll see you next time.